All right, let's talk about one of the trickiest balancing acts in all of economics. I'm talking about the constant tug of war between keeping prices from spiraling out of control and making sure people can find jobs. It sounds simple, right? But it's an incredible economic tightrope. So why is it so hard? Let's get into it.
I mean, this is the question, isn't it? It's what keeps finance ministers and central bankers up at night. Why can't we just have the best of both worlds? Low unemployment, so everyone who wants a job has one, and stable prices, so our money is worth the same tomorrow as it is today. Why is it that when you push on one lever, the other one seems to move in the wrong direction? That's the core puzzle we're going to try and solve.
So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the root of the issue, something called the sticky price problem. Then we'll dive into the famous, or maybe infamous, trade-off known as the Phillips curve. From there, we'll get into the real-world costs of all this, the shocks and sacrifices. And finally, we'll touch on a really important idea, the permanent scars that a bad recession can leave behind. Okay, so first things first, why can't the economy just, adjust on the fly? In a perfect world, it would, but our world isn't perfect. It's got some stubborn problems that get in the way.
You see, in a basic textbook, if demand for stuff goes up, only prices should change. But that's not what happens in reality. As you can see here, when demand changes, it affects both prices and the amount of stuff we actually produce. That upward slope tells you everything. It's a huge clue that there's some kind of friction, some grit in the gears of the economy that stops it from adjusting perfectly.
And a lot of that friction comes from what economists call sticky prices. And it's exactly what it sounds like. Think about it. Your local pizza place doesn't print a new menu with new prices every single morning, right? Companies sign contracts with their suppliers for a year at a time. And most of us get our wages set for a whole year, not day to day. All these things mean prices are slow to react. They're sticky.
And of course, economists have an equation for this. Now don't worry, we are not about to do a big math problem here. The point isn't to solve the equation. The point is to understand what it's telling us about the world. And it really boils down to how the overall price level, that P, gets decided by two main things.
And here's what it is in plain English. That whole complicated formula really just says this. The prices we see today are a mashup of what we thought prices were going to be and what's actually happening in the economy right now, whether it's booming or in a slump. It's part expectation, part reality.
And that idea leads us right to one of the most important concepts in all of short-run economics. It's called the Phillips curve. And this is really the main tool we use to visualize and understand this painful trade-off.
Just look at this graph. It lays out the dilemma perfectly. On the vertical axis, you've got inflation, prices going up. On the horizontal axis, you've got unemployment. And that curve sloping downwards, well, that shows the choice. You want to move down the curve to get lower inflation? You're probably going to have to move to the right and accept higher unemployment. It's a trade-off.
And yep, that relationship has a name, the Phillips curve. It's the model that puts a name to this really tough choice that policymakers are always facing. In the short run, at least, it tells us you can't really have your cake and eat it too. Trying to lower unemployment often means you have to stomach a little more inflation, and vice versa.
So what's really going on under the hood here?
Well, the modern version of the Phillips curve equation breaks it all down for us. It tells us that the actual inflation rate we experience, that little pi symbol, is basically a cocktail of three key ingredients.
So let's look at those three drivers. First up, you've got expected inflation. This one's huge. If we all think prices are going to rise by 3%, we'll ask for 3% raises, and businesses will raise prices by 3%. It can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Second, there's cyclical unemployment. That's basically the difference between the unemployment rate we have now and the natural rate the economy can handle long term. If unemployment falls below that natural rate, the economy is overheating, and that pushes inflation up. And third, you have supply shocks. These are the wild cards, things like a sudden oil crisis or a global pandemic that mess with production costs and can send prices soaring.
So, we've got the theory down. But what happens when the rubber meets the road? What happens when policymakers actually have to step in and do something? This is where things get really difficult and where we start talking about real-world costs and sacrifices.
And it's really important to know that not all inflation is created equal. You have demand-pull inflation, which happens when the economy is just running super hot. Too much money chasing too few goods. That basically just moves us along that Phillips curve we saw. But then there's cost-push inflation. This is the nasty kind. It's caused by a negative supply shock. Think of an oil price spike. And it doesn't just move us along the curve, it shifts the entire curve up. That means you get more inflation at every level of unemployment. It's a fundamentally worse trade-off.
Which brings us to a very, very painful question. When inflation is running high and you have to slam on the brakes to bring it down, what's the actual price we have to pay to do that?
Well, economists have a pretty brutal term for this, the sacrifice ratio. It's a way of measuring the economic pain involved. It asks how many percentage points of our country's entire yearly output, our GDP, do we have to give up just to bring inflation down by one single percentage point. And a pretty common estimate for that ratio is 5%. I want you to just let that number sink in. 5%. That can mean that to get inflation down by just one measly point, the economy might have to lose 5% of its total output for a whole year. And that's not just a number on a screen. That translates into real businesses closing, real people losing their jobs, and real families seeing their incomes fall. It is a massive, massive cost. And here's the really scary part. Sometimes the damage from that fight doesn't just go away when the economy recovers. This brings us to our final concept, and it's a deeply worrying one. The idea that the short-term pain we inflict can sometimes leave permanent scars. The fancy term for this is hysteresis. Basically, it's the theory that a temporary event, like a really deep recession that was engineered to crush inflation, can have a long-lasting or even permanent negative effects. Specifically, it can permanently damage a country's natural rate of unemployment.
And here's how that can happen. Imagine someone loses their job in a bad recession. If they're out of work for a year, 2 years, their skills might get rusty, their professional network of contacts could just evaporate, they might even get discouraged and stop looking altogether. They become detached from the workforce, and it becomes incredibly hard for them to get back in, even after things get better.
So the big takeaway here is that a temporary, policy-induced downturn can permanently wound the labor force. That baseline natural rate of unemployment might not bounce back to where it was before the recession. The economy's left with a lasting scar.
Which leaves us right here with this incredibly difficult question. We've seen the painful trade-offs, we've seen the sacrifice ratios, the real economic pain, we've even seen the risk of permanent damage. So knowing all that, when policymakers are staring down the barrel of high inflation, how do they decide? What price is just too high to pay for stable prices? There's really no easy answer to that at all.